Sanje, Chudang, Soja, Sona.
Janju Badu, Dangi Gapsuchi, Dagi Chenin, Gipe, Tokam, Togan, Tanja, Sange, Topa,
Sanje, Chudang.
Chorang Suki, Chonam Law, Janju Badu, Dagi Gapsuchi, Dagi Chenin, Gipe, Tokam, Togan, Tanja, Sange, Topa,
Sanje, Chudang.
Chorang Suki, Chonam Law, Janju Badu, Dagi Gapsuchi, Dagi Chenin, Gipe, Tokam, Togan, Tanja, Sange, Topa,
Tayanta,
Gate, para, sum gate, body,
Tayanta, Gate, para,
gate, para, sum gate, body,
Tayanta,
gate, para, sum gate,
Well, so that Namjin is in a subject Tamjig to the Tojalana Majaba Sanjay Kumaran put a chinija Tobacha. And the each of the Libet just about love and the Swiss in the Namson, now a single, the symbol of Togo, Togo, Tradition Manoach Kodu. And the comes of Baba, the Daka Cassette, which you will say, Juju with the meditation between some of the chat.
And as we normally do, we begin by setting our motivation, the motivation to do whatever we possibly can to attain a peerless state of enlightenment in order to benefit all living beings. And to, in order to do that, we understand it necessary to perfect all the trainings on the Bodhisattva path. To perfect those trainings in turn, we must have good knowledge of them, we must have a good understanding of them through educating ourselves, and we must educate ourselves from an unmistaken source. And so it is with this in mind that we are here to listen to some verses from the great text, the Bodhisattva's Way of Life by the great master Shantideva.
And then that Namjun is a thing yet, the Mozo, Gasoleta, Comdan, Tanchibi, and a Rangi Dungi Nankala, and it's a Tapjala to the Chimbo de Bashaja to my setup.
And so, as usual, also in terms of maintaining this kind of a meditative status of the teaching, we also will visualize in the space in front of us the one who is compassionate and greatly skilled in means, the figure of Shakyamuni Buddha.
Yes, and in your character to the Kulachugu to just so much. What a delicious person for you, such and Tombati and a Jew on Jamba to go home to commercial. To go home with a part of member tuna, Shinra General Ishiba, Nam Gentle Ishiba, Tobashaja to the Namajan Gentle tip. What tip and it because what is commercial.
And as we normally see the figure of the Buddha, it is the Buddha with the one face and two hands, with the right hand in the earth-touching mudra, and the left hand in the meditative equipoise posture, holding an alms bowl filled with nectar. The figure itself is marked by the three syllables, Om at the crown, at the throat, and Hung at the heart center. From the Hung at the heart center, light rays emanate, going out into the pure realms and inviting the wisdom beings and the empowering deities from their abodes. The wisdom beings dissolve into the central figure. Then all around us are all kind mother sentient beings without exception.
And the same day that Masama never use something. The data number and another because number reduces the Dungan Yonshiba Bala and the Chikasola Takaja and Jigger Takaja reduces the Dungan Yonshiba Bala number Minashi, Namju Yuke, and the Bay Yunde, Kuso to Yunde, Janetilla, and Chikoso Kubakona. What is commercial.
And that although all of the sentient beings are all representatives of the 6 realms of cyclic existence, they are able to understand their situation with a human intelligence. And so, like us, they are looking towards the figure of the Buddha with an appreciation of the Buddha's qualities, able to have faith in the Buddha's qualities of body, speech, and mind, etc.
아니 라니를 찾아내 또 배고소도 연대되게 잡았다네 나에다가 이치겠다 뭐도 그때봐 어떻게 지금 고마시 아니 심지어다 탐적에 아니 동네 그 나트를 삼로다네 라는 고고도 송아치 대화되게 대외보 밑에 동네를 때 동네를 직질을 직튀네 용되겠지 아니 도스전에 원남에 봐도 라오메가 코네 뭐다 어떻게 고마시
And likewise, we have that same faith in the figure of the Buddha and in the qualities of enlightenment through the pure faith, the manifest faith, and the faith of conviction. And likewise, we start to contemplate the various sufferings of all the sentient beings surrounding us, and that we kind of identify very clearly with the suffering of their being, on the one hand, bereft of the happiness that they so crave, and that they are inundated by the sufferings that they don't want. This is all very clear to us. It's very clear that from the peak of cyclic existence down to the hell without respite, that this is the nature of cyclic existence, and that the sentient beings have to undergo this suffering without any control over their situation.
아니 때문에 윤대디가 때문에 거네 아니 저 가서도 다외다가 있어도 뭐 돌아서 뭐 어떻게 지금 공부하셔
And that in contemplating the various sufferings, we develop this sense of unbearable compassion to kind of want to remove and to do something about that suffering. And this combines with this faith that we have in the enlightened figure of the Buddha, the faith of pure faith, the faith of conviction, and the manifest faith.
What are the leg at the Gasoda, the lady in Baja Misube Nijig, Kunelana, that Tunga, Judah Java, Chimano, Java, Java, Short, Java, Target, Commercial, and then that, and it was that they were Judah by the Chimano, Temba, Temba, Short, and the Temba Target. What did the commercial? And what the compassion that's also was a Chicago to do, and the Chema was able to, and they knew what the Sula does, and the same to the two Lambda, was Sanjo, that corner to Congo Combine Tobaina, and the kitchen didn't a few member try to eat you and that the lady by inside culture there, and the chickens Congo Combine much on the top of the Tuba chicken commercial.
And that, we contemplate this unbearable feeling of empathy with sentient beings, the compassion that wants to remove their suffering, and think how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings were free from suffering and the causes of suffering. And may this be the case. May I be the one to do this, to set this about. And likewise, in terms of happiness, how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had happiness and the causes of happiness. And may it be so. May I be the one to bring this about. And that as much as we kind of aspire to do this, it's very clear to us that we don't have the capacity even to do this, perfectly for one sentient being. And that, but when we look at the figure of the Buddha, we realize that the Buddha has generated the mind of enlightenment at the outset for the sake of sentient beings, and then trained on the path with that same motivation, and even attained full and complete enlightenment purely for the benefit of sentient beings. And they have that capacity, that knowledge of individual dispositions, personalities, and karmic propensities, etc., that in each moment they are able to ripen those minds that are ready to be ripened, and that they are leading the others to that state where they can ripen their minds towards enlightenment. So they have that capacity to do what I aspire to do. Therefore, I realize it is now essential for me to also attain that state of enlightenment, so that I can turn these aspirations into a reality.
What is compassion? This compassion, what is compassion? And it Lama to be Omo, Commission Bangana, and it 어디 좀 세야 어디 쳐 다 미유 라마 투배 공부 고말 투배 체도 아니 주주고 흉대 지금 가서
And so we conclude that this is the very reason for which I am here today, to listen to some of the text of the Bodhisattva's way of life. That is, that I am to emulate and to attain that state of the Guru Ninja, the Buddha.
Lama Zongkaba Suban Shitcher, Tube Duan, Jeva in Besson, Tube Dundadi, Tube Dundadi, and Yamin Cheers, Tube Shabaji, Yamin Shabaji, Tube Dunda Tagara, Yamin Cheers, Son, and Junju Shune. So I think I was Tuba Tagana, Yamin Cheers. What is it?
So we remind ourselves of the kind of the ultimatum of Lama Tsongkhapa said that we learn in order to practice. We learn so that thereafter immediately to put it into our practice. And so he said that the practice of Dharma and the study of Dharma are not two separate disciplines, that they are one and the same, that the Dharma that we learn is the Dharma that we immediately integrate into our lives, into practice. Shokran di gyatang jume gu di wogi chikdi shiba sem sungwela tremba lunglangwan.
Shiba sem sungwela tremba sung. Oh yeah. Hola, Suda. Da 간제 지금. 그래, 다 같이 주변에 시대 말한도 지금 단위 따기 고야에 단위 따기 자연이 소외들어서 사제가 소외돼. 소소 셈 마디바도 뒤바체네. 아니 지금 뒤네. 아니 지금 가서 냠내 잡아이나 단위 고연차가 다 셈디 아니 마디바체네. 아니 라생의 샤완도 셈 묘모베 샤완도 존에 치바이나 아니 단위 자야 차되게 다 줄로네 요마 딱가 난게 차되기도 와 줄로네 먼저 너가 지금 연구할 때 이내 난게 셈 마디바 때네 아니 레시발 사바 델라 때네 아니 줄로 깨쳐도 나를 좀 용되기도 와 다들 가서 셈 뒤 마디라 때네 대화도 좀 용되지 다르도나.
So as it says in the Buddhist teachings that we are each our own friend, we are each our own enemy. And what is meant by that is that when one is operating through a disciplined mind, where we have control over our actions, that then we can accumulate the necessary beneficial karmas to be our own friend and to create friends in our own milieu, our own atmosphere. And on the other hand, we are our own enemies. That from a non-disciplined mind, we accumulate karmas, lay down imprints to create the external enemies within our own environment. And so it's very much showing that it all depends on whether or not we have control over our own minds.
What is it? Tagalisha, Cheda Maja singing there, Cheda Maja singing there, Jeda Maja singing there, and you got the Gawachima Kellamale, Kujo Kellamale, there's a Mare, Church Maja singing there, or Kasura Takanja. Sem dueg nyamle cheta machela kloti kitwa sem dueg nyamle javana cheche sem dueg nyamle machawa ina ane kaze kelle baine ko al cheche ba kon dogu mdo cheche ba kon cheche ba jaso so sem dueg nyamle jigi do jigi mdo sem dueg nyamle jigi do na cheche sem dueg nyamle jigi mdo na mi ji o ko chobare kare laba imba ine ko chugu tela dogu mdo wa da sem du ma tu ni la tena rale de do. Good, Chicasso, Dominic Tabaina.
So likewise, the demarcation point between what is and isn't spiritual practice is also very much related to this, that whether we believe in past and future lives, whether we believe in the state of enlightenment and so on, or creator God or whatever, this is not what is the telling issue of whether one is a Dharma practitioner or not. The key issue is whether or not you are engaging in the practice of subduing your own mind, of controlling your own mind. And so if you are doing that, one is regarded as somebody engaged in spiritual practice. If you're not doing that, regardless of what people regard you as, if people call you the great practitioner, it doesn't matter. If you're not engaged in the practice of really controlling and subduing your own mind, then you're not engaged in spiritual practice. And so this, really is the kind of border between what is and isn't Dharma practice.
그래서 출로네 르부체 람네 핑거 말에 기시 람네 핑거 말에 아니 냠네 발람네 핑거 말에 오다 가자 리빙 부다 람네 핑거 말에 다 칼람네 핑거 뭐도 소소 셈 뒤에 내가 지금 해나 소소 셈 뒤에 내가 지금 도나 민 가야 매바 이네 소소 쳐봐 차대요 셈 뒤에 내가 지금 해나 아니 민 가르 따라 마다나 소소 쳐봐 이봐 차대요 아니 동네 유튜브 대요 다 되래 미 파적에 쳐봐래 and living Buddha, Kochova Chada, living Buddha Chada Midua. So Rangi, Sem do the Madula. Sem dona Chobare, Sem Maduna, Chobamare, Muyugi. What in the Sem dona, Tiki Yungre, Sem Maduna, Tunga Yungre. Ming Chijun Kita Kaya Yomata.
And so it doesn't matter what label you have, name you have, reputation you have, somebody referring to you as a Rinpoche or a Geshe or a living Buddha, it's irrelevant. This is to whether or not you are a spiritual practitioner or not. That the name is not where it's at. It's whether or not you are engaged in the practice of controlling and subduing your own mind. That is counted as a spiritual practitioner. If you're not engaged in that practice, then you're not engaged in as a spiritual practitioner. You're only engaged in creating the causes of suffering. And so this is the important thing about it, that the controlled mind leads to happiness, and uncontrolled mind leads to suffering. This is reality. This is a natural law, the way things are.
소소 단답포도 제와데 안 셈뒤에 졸라 친도나 오다사 쳬바 빠가차 되어라 셈뒤에 졸라 치모도 오다랑게 놓아대어 아니 뒤하고 베터는 다 니마 데리네 센데 아니 강투도게 안 셈뒤에 졸라 강투도게 공바자야 아니 셈마 뒤에 졸데 숙촌도 충도 다는 매바소다 제티.
So this is something that we must recognize clearly, this capacity to control the mind, to subdue the mind, and that if we have not been emphasizing this, in other words, not counting this as something important, we should recognize our mistake and therefore change our emphasis from here on in, and change the whole trajectory of our spiritual life.
다든지 뭐서 아니 전주고 슝다 된돌라 때는다 소소 아니 단답포도 그거 태도 때문도 그거 태도나 아니 그거 맞게 받지 그거 때문에 오다 야부지서 제수 일하잖아 아니 못는 들었어요 오다 간자 다지 간자 저 소소 그거 맞게 받지 문에다는 소소 미지데 되다 되봐 용해지 돌았다 가서도 아니 전주 되는 중점부터 멜론 때는 아니 랑게 가서 저기 셈 랑을 룽아 예수인데 아니 너무 뒤에 초라 친도야 너무 마두에 초라 친도 뒤 멜론을 때는 못 초라지.
So in this sense, we must look to the Bodhisattva's way of life as being really something to tell us whether we are deceiving ourselves or not. It's an extremely skillful text in that respect. And so if we find ourselves kind of deceiving ourselves into thinking that we're engaged in a spiritual life, then we need to adjust and get it right. If we find that we are not deceiving ourselves, that if we are living in accordance with what's advised in the Bodhisattva's way of life, then we rejoice in that. That's something really worth rejoicing in. Because after all, what we're trying to live is a meaningful life. And that we have to get clear on what that is. And the Bodhisattva's way of life, this should be like a mirror to us, to actually show us whether we are really in control of our three doorways of body, speech, and mind, or whether we are simply doorways to mental affliction. And so this should tell us very, very clearly where we're at, and after to make the necessary adjustments if necessary.
Rada semdi and dugu you and the same to each other and sem sungu that is one cargos and that jabata shishing the one sem sungu yore Yamong cho the jogu to jogundo Yamong watch over and each of the jogu to jogundo what did it
so therefore we should see it as our responsibility to control this mind, and in the purpose of doing that, we employ mindfulness and alertness as those mental factors that can guard that mind.
That is the concept of that Shiva Semsonala and a Jabal Hulang was a Jabal Hulang on it Zawale. Dagi, Nieta Kudita, Luda Soa Melashin, Gawashaya Namla, Semin Namya Namichas.
So we arrived at a subheading, which states the kind of like how, in order to protect the mind, mindfulness is something that needs to be almost spontaneous, automatic, constant. Verse number 22 states, "It is better to be without wealth, honor, body, and livelihood. And it is better to let other virtues deteriorate rather than ever to let the virtues of the mind decline."
What did it? That the day in Baja, and it is what in the that gave Namdaya Mambo Yori, gave Namda Mambo Yori, that did not that Geshe should rather do some Sanja Tanja Lambuchenta with the Chanju Assembly, that Chanju Assembly, and some of the Dunaya Mania, but you would that's all this what did it?
So there are many ways in which one's virtue can decline. Here, the import of this verse is focused on the mind of enlightenment, the bodhicitta mind. And so it's saying here that once one was unable to protect one's commitment to enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings, that is a guarantee of not allowing the mind to decline.
That lose soil, say go, that's what Dagi is a and nearby the Kudilas or Taka Pember to Zoku Yore. And the Luda so never as a that get the Goyo there, and it's what there's a Meva Yinaya, and it's Meva Yinaya, and it's Castle Meva Yinaya, a thing will let you to it. Rather, Meva Yimba Yinaya, Gazet Neva Yine, social city, and never began on the New York, but that did Hake Marwa. Taganising and Taganising, and Gawapita was a medical Gawa Imbias or maybe sort of the same in the Natan, the Tamtu, the same in a charter, the quarter time today, you would want. And the day Shamajone, to get there to Madonna, I catch him okay, my response. Yinaya, that Chanjuk is same game. Rather, Chanjuk is same. Mageva gave the Yamsona, that the Pamboras, and then do not and Yam to Maris. To Yam and Yam to Maris. Ruata, Rangi Nega with 2 years last of what you get the Chimbi Majo and Ina, she was okay, your Maris could never make up the coaching to rest. And it's Yanjing was rather than the Gawachi Danjorva. Samlo Damada Dangi, Nasaya, Jamdo Saya, Chasaya, Kora Saya, Neko, the Netito the Chigure. What I call Imbesora, members of Chicken Chige Imbesora. A design Yamla should get him a Marista, Chanjo was a Majima Kiabacha, Tin Yamsonata Pesavaris. Tin Yamna Maris, what thought in a theory, what the Yamis, never be Chawacha.
So it's pointing here in terms of the necessities of life, that's what we need, like food and clothing, etc. Talks about respect, in our livelihood. If we were to lose those, or that the mind was distracted into other kinds of virtue, such as engaging in prostration or the recitation of mantra, and circumambulation, pilgrimage, etc. That if they were to kind of deteriorate and go, that's fine. That would be okay. But we must never allow our commitment to the mind of enlightenment to ever deteriorate. That is far too precious. So it's kind of like really pointing this out. It's also pointing out in a way implicitly that if we are distracted in the sense of the way we are reciting mantras and so on, or doing circumambulation or prostration or pilgrimage, that it can be doubtful whether that is the engaging in the accumulation of virtue or not. That it's very unclear, especially when our mind is distracted. And so in terms of a focused commitment to the mind of enlightenment, that's always going to be the best way to spend our time, spend our focus and concentration. So we must never allow that to deteriorate.
제가 양고전에 녀몽고 교차고나 최차고나 좀좀 따지자기도 다 자주그 셈 개와이 자주그 셈 개베게 아니 연된데 다 최마이 바찰 똑바요 말마다 똑바 매되겠지 아니 디 랑게 튼게 가야 상고요 말이야 튼게 가야 매바네 강에 연하에 자주 셈 검도 그래 강에 매바이네 자주 셈 거다 소소 삼로 땅 도마도 저래만도 삼로 땅나 심마신지 레만도 교부 중나야 자주가 셈 것도 그래. 아니 나사 중화이네 자주가 셈 것도 그래. 시가사가 임바이네 자주가 셈 검도 그래. 소소 삼로 땅시나 딜라 다 꼬라사야 다지 저거에 대한 수불에 튕겨서 무유제 거기도 와. 자제 먹고 산 거기도 와. 지금 제국도 와. 다 자주가 셈 거발라. 소소 삼로 땅당 내세대 당소나 아니 삼로 땅에 디 아니 랑게 잼바게 자주가 셈투 검투에 잼바지 삼로 땅도나 잼바데 세신의 냠내지 제투가 있나 가기 이마이나야 자주가 셈 검투고 열다 로아 수구톱 최종 계좌 요말에 칼라 야니 계좌 요말에 아니 가서래 네바다 네바 많이 배 계좌 요말에 다 가디 이네 아니 수이네 검투에 딱 가리어서 심마신 개발에 심바데 아니 점바다 세생게 냐토마도지 개발지 누구로 봐. 어때 들으래. 다들 수이네 제투에 주여바데 다디 심바데 전세가 손에 아니 디마냐 지고는 디마냐마다 심바 카바지 다지 마상와 차와나 가야 말했어.
So it's clear, isn't it, that engaging in the other dharmas, it's sometimes a toss-up, whether we are actually accumulating virtue or more mental affliction, more negativity. It can be the case, but such is the quality of the mind of enlightenment that if we are focused on that mind of enlightenment, then there's little doubt that it is always going to be virtuous. So this is something that we must take into consideration. Another point is, of course, that when we are trying to sustain that ideal of the mind of enlightenment, interestingly enough, it doesn't require any other special external conditions. All we have to do is control our own thinking, direct our own motivation, that you actually need nothing at all. no special food or place to be or costume to do that. It's everything that you have at present is there. You can be completely poverty stricken. You can be sick. You can be at the point of death, but you can still practice the mind of enlightenment. And this is very, very important that we cultivate mindfulness and alertness so that we can sustain that focus on the mind of enlightenment. So it's very, very clear that in other kinds of practice, again, like prostration, of course, circumambulation and pilgrimage, etc., you do need to be have external conditions just right in order to be able to engage in those practices. But with the mind of enlightenment, we can practice whenever, wherever. And so this is very, very important to remember. And therefore, when it comes to the cultivation of and the sustaining of mindfulness and alertness, we should always bear in mind that it is for the purpose of also kind of really maintaining a focus on that mind of enlightenment.
Kimne Chanju Semkom, Dune Chanju Semkom, Nane Chanju Semkom, Orenda, Kade Chavaine, Roa, Lega Ravaine, Chanju Semkom, Lega Shovaine, Chanju Semkom, Sonya Wachune, Chanju Semkom, Fondu Jajune, Chanju Semkom. That Chanju Sem Gadu in a contuage. And then Dilatine, Nageta, Tado, the Shedan, the Condros, but you don't remember what. 무슨 나게께서 세단께서 샘제들을 때리고 다 샘제데 다 쉬우지 자체 못 쓰네. 대체됐다. 용사 쓰면 좋아.
So the mind of enlightenment meditation is really that one size fits all. It is really a kind of like universally possible at all times, whether we've just got a new job and we're celebrating, or whether we've just lost that job and we're not celebrating. We can still maintain that attitude of the mind of enlightenment, whether business is booming or the business is bust. It's still as relevant, the mind of enlightenment. And when we are kind of living within our mind imbued with the mind of enlightenment, there can be no pride or arrogance or hatred or spite or the holding of grudges, etc., jealousy and so on, because of the fact that we hold sentient beings so high and they are so sacred, so precious to us, that we could never entertain any sort of negative attitude towards them.
초주 겨와서다 제발로 초바에 디래라 요마로 초주 겨와서다 제발 개치주세야 돼 아니 샘젠소래 가서라 샘젠도 투이겨버려 샘젠도 라나라 샘젠도 뭐가 다가 샘젠을 그바 주베들래 샤바지 가 요마래 된다 소주 샘젠 탐제거도 산제 고마 되는 예외 로께네 아니 강투도게 아니 겨와를 좀 임바이나 계속 다니 쳐볼 딜레 쳐바치 가요래.
So we can also rest assured that there is no higher practice that we can engage in. There's no more exalted practitioner than the one who is completely dedicated towards the mind of enlightenment. Because the Buddha himself generated that mind of enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings, trained on the path for the benefit of sentient beings, attained the full and complete enlightenment for the benefit of sentient beings. So the best we can do is to really be of best benefit as possible to all sentient beings at all times.
심지어 수임바이네 소소게다 무엇이마신 된대기 개와 용거래다 이 개와 가요 말 무엇이마신 가요 개와 말 심지어 수임바이네 아니 지금 진짜 마긴 게 심지어라 때네 아니 딜라 탐바투에 삼리께 온데 아니 지 토너미트 마메바요 레와 수레에 가마가 가요 말 디메다 딜레 셈기바지 가요 딜레 셈기바지 가요 다 좋아 어떤데 다 된대 임바이자 그 소소 개라 임바이네 어다 셈 Dili Kibajikayo, Dilla Tene, and also Nana Sanua, never you by the young Nasa Taya Lela, Casa Sosu immune system, the Pemisi Yapo the net to one. You are control the Shatanda, Najet to get and also the immune system to get you, and that the Jamba the Niji get to Dilla Gurja Majija, and Dia compared to Joel Pendant and Nana Sanua, same Kiva.
And so also it's a guarantee of a happy mind. That what happier mind could we aspire to? That we are constantly doing very best that we can to help and benefit and understand all other sentient beings. It's not a case of whether we know them or not, or like them or dislike them. These are not issues. They are kind, mother, sentient beings. And so that's the only prerogative that we have to benefit them, because they are kind, mother, sentient beings. And that it's also something that, that brings, of course, tremendous lightness and inspiration to our own mind. It's also proven as a scientific benefit to recovering from illness more quickly, and to experiencing fewer illnesses, because it's something that is very much support for our immune system. Unlike the generation of anger and spite and so on, which is said to kind of compromise our immune system.
What did it? What did it? What did that delay in the Taka Jaju same day, and it's a Magava Kiva, and it gave the corner on the pay at attack, Chikasu, Taka Judge, corner on the pay at Taka Judge, got to Kasu the Taka Judge, and it Jembe Sonia, that Jamba Dimanya Church. Niana, Sana, Donna, Tuna, that Jolam, condition by the same the Manyamachi. What did it say?
And so, as the prayer says, may the precious body, mind, and not yet born, arise and grow. May that grow. May that born have no decline, but increase more and more. And so, to really see this as the pinnacle of practice, and to kind of maintain that as our focus.
That join and rang visit when the visit don't the Bassin Chavarwa, and Chiwaning, Namjin Yeme. And then she said that you're going to chairman the Kayam, that you're going to Janju similar Hagaja Kayota. Janju similar Hagaja Kayota.
And so that makes for, of course, a meaningful life as well. That we are aware of how death is definite, how the time of death is definite. But what better attitude to be able to pass away with than with that mind of enlightenment motivation? There's nothing better than that.
That never Samsung top that Samsung top Jamba the Shijan Sua Nietzsche and thought about the Gava Shaba subject Nikonacha.
The next outline is that looking at the means for protection of the mind is the protection of our mindfulness and alertness. This is going to be dealt with briefly at the beginning, and then a more extensive explanation later on.
Samsung Deva Namlani Jambatani Sheshenta Tamje Baby Sungshiche Dani Data Tombache.
So verse number 23. O you who wish to guard your minds, I beseech you with folded hands, always exert yourselves to guard mindfulness and alertness.
What did Tapanja the Gachamo in by Insa, the Gachamo in by Insa Shiwalagita, Reguna Gutwa. That Samsung doing it, that is Samsung or the shit, how cooking it, that Samsung Tamandus, that watching it, that Samsung too much you would what then, do about digging it, and he would dig this. He would Namlani, and it gave me Namlasa, that gave me Rota Chajuga Semdata together, gave me Nam Majebe as a Jambatani. 미제베 잡아차 잡아다 아니 고숨제 내가다 소소 류가스게 자와근데 시기 유번네 그러다 거라 자기 유번네 차스게 유번 난가라 도고 유번네다 그때 이번에 류가스고 류가 예수가 내가 근데 지번에 류기 내가 근데 이 나게 맞주 주에 그때 지봐 근데 제시바 근데 지봐 아니 이게 가리 대시바 그 진짜 지번이네 다 쏟아 지사 되려 류기데 딱딱 쳐도 좀 버리기도 나게 좀 버리기도 이게 투마 레그도서 딱 와서 데려와다. then what the because 내가 진짜 주와라서 또 백합다 주와라 또 변이게 루기나 딱 지금 요구라서 근데 제시백합 나게 엠마줄라서 근데 셰백합 뭐다 what 지금 저도 투마 레마테도 what 아니 이게 근데 제시백합 그래서 지다 주와서 또 백다디 뭐처럼 셰백제네 최대 투마 조고도 정도도 또 배서 또 배谢谢的说了别讲是明年吧他说了别讲的那个呢가서도 개회 초대를 민양바라 송시제 다 송고도 송시제 아니 시월라다게 되게 또 맞았다 시월라 공게 되게 되지 아니 다 가서도 되게 제고도 아니 딜레 다 마냐바 제고도 와서 또 맞지겠어 어디서 다 동바선다 제국도 와서다 딜레 마테와 제국도 와서다 간자 지금 부규슈와 소리 난것도 와 어디를 다들 또 어디를
So this verse is a kind of an exhortation from Master Shantideva himself, saying, like, for you, all you who really wish to protect your mind, to guard your mind, and to not allow one's focus on virtue, particularly the virtue associated with the mind of enlightenment, to deteriorate, to lose that focus, that one maintains mindfulness of virtue, and that is also one is constantly checking through alertness as to the status of our body, speech, and mind. Is there anything inappropriate occurring physically, verbally, or mentally? And so one is maintaining that high level of focus, even at the cost of our lives. It's like we shouldn't allow this kind of protection to diminish or to deteriorate. And yes, Master Shantideva is himself making this exhortation to us. It is that important.
或者他感觉这当这个去给那是感觉性格有吧赢的，也不性格有吧赢的呀。按那个这个的那个龙啊也送给刚结吧第高了，按这个这把的写信给按加了钱呢，写信给这边送写信给加了钱呢，按这搞了，按告诉的这把的按这个告诉的给位这把的马上把钱呢送掉的钱嘛多呢。 아니 그 가서는 지금 랑 셈게 시마도 저 셈용문게 시마도 저네 아니 지금 교정 부스보다 한 먹어 왔지네 아니 가서도 다 미개에 철을 줘대다 용되기도 와 그래서 레당보 인사 되네요 다 되게 전배 철을 샤는 가서도 대세가 손에 로 전배 시신의 자라체 전박이 손에 왔다 되는 전에 아니 그 지금 마냐바 제투나 아니 남시나 아니 랑슈게 삼로 땅 먹어봐 랑슈게 아니 계획 철을 줘되겠지 다다 가서 셈코나 검신 년바 차대어 봐 검신 년바 차대도 아니 거기 랑슈 다 되네 아니 검신 년바에 다 가서 다 가서 시계 결론 트레이닝 소리 쓰고 다 간자 될 롭종 소리 째네 아니 남시나 아니 라완 슈슈게 아니 줘되지 가서나 그 셈가 랑신라 지멜레바 슈요 말에 지만나 로보와 임바 인사 아니 미게베 쇼 노모와다 디가 로보와레 싱베라시를 쇼바 싱베라시를 외사와레 안데레서 산제그리 디르와다 산제그리서 외사와레 데레 임바자 남시나 거기 가서 검시가 또도 마마마마마마 냠정도 아니 싱베라신이 뭐여기 시가데 아니 야 차로와 좀 그러봐 아니 디야야 차원도 아니 랑슈고 용되지 야와디가 랑슈고 용되지 요구로 티 마중거 봐도 다 덴베 시신게 자라체 아니 덴베 송 와다들 저 로고 다 간장소네 아니 그 저기 샘디 검실라 파 자사도 아랑쇼게 돼 저도 좀 거로 와 그러면 다교사들로 와 다교사들 사자절 당고 다 사바이나 다 주고 말어 와 아니 될 찍대 니대 숨대 거 간장소네 거디 칸는데 거 랑쇼 주도 좀 거로 와我的生命中当这个这样的，
So it's that we become experts really at what is occurring within our body, speech, and mind at all times, and using both mindfulness and alertness as the checking agents as to what is going on there. Is my virtue focus maintained, or am I now under the control of mental affliction? And so we must understand that this sort of investigation is very important at this beginner stage of our virtue or our spiritual career, and that we need this sense of constant checking to see where we're at all times. And so when we engage in mindfulness and alertness to do that analysis and find that we haven't lost the focus on virtue, and then of course it's something that we can rejoice in. And this is important also because we are simply recognizing the nature of mind itself. It is something that is clear, it is knowing. It doesn't kind of form these opinions that whatever is occurring in our mind, the habitual tendencies of our mind are simply that. They are habits. They are formed adventitiously and have been strengthened over time to now behave in this particular way. And this is a very important ascertainment, because we can both understand why we are the way we are, why we tend to think the way we think, but also we can see that because the mind is of this nature, it is something that can be changed. We can transform the habits of mind. And so this is kind of absolutely key, and the great sense of hope for us, that it's about a training process, that by understanding the nature of mind, that we can raise up the whole genre, the whole type of thinking that we have in our minds, and to engage in that virtue can become the go-to thought for our minds. You know, that whenever we enter into analysis using mindfulness and alertness, we find that our mind is already focused on virtue, and make that the natural habit of mind.
所以我在这，他感觉真把的谢谢你的手给这么知道，真把的谢谢你了，但呢，俺这个什么的送就不多多，但真把多的真把谢谢多的真把就买把人呢，俺送就不多多，真把的谢谢多的真把就买人呢，俺告诉他这个什么送就不多，他什么要么会想往的嘛就把钱呢，想往的就把的，穷的这样的，那么些呢，俺嘛就把钱出来说多多。
So it's important that these mental factors of mindfulness and alertness are absolutely key, and that a fully empowered, when we have a fully empowered mindfulness backed up by a fully empowered alertness, there is no kind of overt protection necessary for the mind, because we're already there, that the mind will not fall onto the side of affliction, and that we will always proceed kind of carefully along the right path.
다 니바 개와 쉐발라 니체네 개와 쉐발라 니체네 다가 저저 시시 매베 님이다 다 시시 매바이나 가리교는 그래서 님이다 아니 다 데데 님이 데데 요번에 시시 소에 다 로다 시시 소에 탑 아니 잠바 소 아자 로아
And so the next outline then was this promised more extensive explanation of this particular point. And so this is two subheadings. One is the faults of a lack of alertness. And secondly, the protection or the guarding of mindfulness as a means of guarding our alertness.
what did the sheshe meba yina so gewa jigu yote gozu and gewa jigu yo so the same gewal de marta same gewal made bache so gewa che yo and roa or the malang chutai o mani pema mala chutai ni chutai o bum chutai se ko sheshe ge la ta yo marta ko dawe tanga chamendo argument wa ta sheshe ya bo jo yina 아니 그 말아 찍마도 마다네 창고 찍마도 마다네 그 개와디 비다고 때도 와 이면은 다 시시 야고 저번 아니 지 당해도 니만 먹고 당 여봐 이나 시신게 시신 데메도 아니 거다 장가 먹고 자 여러면도 최랑샤 하요 말이다 마음 차주도 와 차주도 와다 디인자 당까지 로다 데리 이마자 당까지 제 다간자제 제 다간자 다 님이들이 용해도 다들 소소 뉴스 트라스로 저러지도 다들 지수무요 근데서 당고 다 시시매매 님이라 나제는 아니 제시다 제나 저다 제시다 저번에 자와 간제야 아니 투중아 니바 중아 요레스 아니 셰라 남다도 미게와 추전 남다도 미중아 뭐사베 게와 지바 나를 맞제베 게와
And so with regard to the first of these, that the faults of a lack of alertness, and this is all too apparent, really, isn't it? That, you know, that when we're trying to focus on virtue and how easily it is for the mind to stray onto any other distraction, isn't it? It's kind of like the mind will not stay on that object of virtue, you know, and we can engage in, you know, serious practice like recitation of 100,000 or many Pemi Hum mantras, for example. But if we're really honest, how many were we really, you know, focused on? You know, have we just accumulated the virtue of actual recitation, but not really any kind of quality practice there? Maybe one or two malas were decent virtues, but the rest we were completely, you know, distracted from. So it's a really key and chronic issue that we have, and so we need to be able to kind of maintain kind of or just focus on or emphasize this alertness as something really key. And it's both really, it's both mindfulness and alertness that we need to cultivate. And so this is going to be dealt with in terms of 5 different subheadings. And so the first of these is that a separation from mindfulness and alertness, or a lack of mindfulness and alertness, means that nothing can be done with any great power, any great focus. Secondly, that no decent wisdom can be accumulated. No decent ethical conduct can be maintained. Fourthly, that previously accumulated virtues were destroyed. Fifth, that future, that all that will be accumulated is an obstacle to future possible virtues. So 5 different points.
지금보다 먼저 좀더 말아도 다 뭔가를 저 표제 가서데 표제 잡으라고 연구요 그래. 좀더 칸되제 쟤네 아니 안 칸데 나가 망고르지 가시에 여봐이나 아니 거다 제가 양고 주면 왔어요 간사서 아니 디체나 제만나 손에 도와서기도 어디 사리나 사면 도와서 연구도 가서 그 대배 마송아 쓰고 싶지 않아다 선생님 되게 돼요 약간 식담을 친구로 와 아니 어디 되라 매나 도와서야 되고 연구도 안 손은 가서 가지 등에 양가 셔마 당가 가시 신고 여봐 인사 가 셔마 절 도와야 되는 연구도 배는 어머니 배면 당거든요 야 장가 셔마 시다니야 어머니는 마음을 쓰서는 되는 거지 영어 되기도 가서 그 제목을 숨으면 다 쓰고 자와 아니 다 루데데마다 센데다 쇼핑 센터 다 가봐 다 내가 가리 제거메다 되게 가상 괜히 깨자다 뭐다 영 대득도다 데레 아니 근데 내가 제거만 거지 제한 거다 내가 제거만 거지 제한 어다 디제 요서 뭐 제한 것도 왔다 어디를 전에 간다 그냥 겨미고 딱딱 샤야 돼 가보도 와 어디래
And so, you know, I don't think it's necessary to overemphasize the lack of mindfulness and alertness that we experience. All of us, really, on a daily basis. All we need to do is look at our daily kind of prayers or commitments. You know, has it ever occurred to you, like, or has it ever happened that, you know, you've been engaging in saying you're doing your commitments, and then you suddenly kind of go, oh, have I said that part or not? You know, you have doubt over whether you've even gone through that particular section of the practice, or you're reciting a particular mantra, and then you suddenly wake up and you find yourself actually reciting a different mantra. And so this is a sure sign that there's no mindfulness or alertness kind of anywhere near your practice. Or, you know, even though the body is kind of sitting in the one place, but the mind is away in the shopping center, or you're really going over what you said yesterday to so and so, or going over all the jobs that you have to do on your list. You know, I have to do this and I have to do that, and nowhere near what you should be doing.
어디를 다들 이마인도 나까지 저기 겨우근데 수바이네 아니 점바다 시신 그 숨마도 나다 교연들의 유연시다 들을 대배 숨고 요바시 다 점바 숨고도 다들 다 마송이나 다까지 대대게 시신 매비게 니미들 시신 매비 교연들은 같이 손을 원들을 다 당보들 제세의 자와이나 자와 간 자와의 투충조를 누가 충조를 투충조를 그래 배는 차샤바는 것들 와 배는 차샤나 말해서 남겨 이게 니 시장지 관다 찾았잖아 아니 디바사한테 인크리스 조금 말해서 시고 열봐 가서 야 파르게 말했어요 디리 디바 지나서니 디바 니 차셔 디바 시차되는 게 야 파르고 그랬어 딱 이게 니 시장지 담아이나 근데 지금 말했어 이 신시장지 장가서 말해 장가상도 말해 다들 가서 잼배 마냥 맞잖아 장국도 제배 마냥 맞은 장국도 어들전 어들 장국도 다들 맞잖아 아니 니시상지 담아이네 거 투요 말봐 인크리스 맞아 장거 거서 평균은 다 주러 왔다 다 투중화서 들어왔다 투중화서 들어 누가 중화서 그럼 맨날 이게 몸제 싸나 디바 싸바가 다 주고 그랬어 식으로 다 좋아 다 이게 몸제 싸네 디바 다 예매돼 소소 점박 가서 다 흉내 송하는 시 흉내 송하는 시가 다 변에 장주가 셈 거미야 동리 도배 셔럽 거미야 안에들 안에 도지 선반 밑에 샤는 거미야 된나라랑 심해봐 거미야 다 디게가 뒤도 딱딱딱딱 삼모 땅 거에 돼 점박 송토 매나 아니 디디가 다와도 연구 말해 봐. 다 페이지 다 연구를 다 되네 다와도 다 투중화서 디스고 봐.
So, for example, you know, we are advised to recite the 100-syllable Bodhisattva mantra at the end of each day 21 times in order to avoid negativities increasing. So because of they have that quality that negativity is accumulated will increase over time, so that you could be, you could have to experience a very serious ripening result from them. But when we actually do this at the end of the day, like how much kind of mindfulness and alertness do we bring to the recitation of these mantras? That you can see that it can be very, very sort of anemic in terms of how much attention we bring to them. And that therefore we have to question to what extent are they effective? Are they effective in stopping negativities from increasing? And so we might get into the practice at the beginning, generating the mind of enlightenment, combining with emptiness, and going into the lack of inherent existence and all that. But without mindfulness and alertness at that stage, we have to ask the question: are we really, even if we're reciting, say, 100,000 100-syllable mantras, and that if we don't bring mindfulness and alertness to the table, to what extent are we really purifying the negativities?
What the young that to get the cup to some town to Madu, Caso de Jebe Sung to Madut. You could walk what did it? That the name was up, what the Tatan would did what up. That Geshe, that Java, Java, Geshe, Dance, Jena, Jawa Ganja, Tuchuas, that Tuchua. But Digilandus, because it was Java, because of the shaking the door in Alola. Shaking the door, same year Japanese, same year Japanese, and Jigger, because of the Rangi doing a matter, Shingi don't Galatrosata, same year Java Javati, and the Jigger Rangi Doda, Juele, Pengu Mevaina, and the Shingi Doda, the Kawayungus. The Sanjay combat to execute the Kawayungus. What does get about the
So, kind of like it's really, it's kind of necessary for us to ask this at the outset, whether we're, when we're reciting a mala of any mantra, in particular, in this case, the 100-syllable Bodhisattva mantra, that, to what extent we are bringing mindfulness and alertness to bear on this recitation, how absent is it, how present is it, and so on. In other words, are we really there? Are we really reciting it, or are we kind of like distracted into some other place? And then, as it says in the Perfection of Wisdom literature, if you're practicing with distraction, you are in no way fulfilling your own purpose. So how on earth could you be fulfilling the purpose of others, leading them to the state of enlightenment?
What is what that is what that would send you to me was what that is what then that comes above the Geshe that Java Jawa Kanja, Tuchua de la Tatambula Zawale. Kanji Neji Tubani, because of Kanji Tube meeting, because Neji Tube meeting is Quanta, Neji Tube meeting, Lena Kola Tumela, Deshe Mombe Semdruba, Lena Kola Tumetos.
And so this particular outline, the kind of a mind is separated from mindfulness and alertness is not really fit to do much at all. Verse number 24 states, people who are disturbed by sickness have no strength to do anything useful. Likewise, those whose minds are disturbed by confusion have no strength to do anything wholesome.
What negative debate, negative none, that Nejon Tendeje, Misuim Banamita, and then Lenam, Legalision, Lenam La, Lenam, the Jawa Garichava, and Nivachuma two melas. Asian do Gidigi Langdola Mongbachene, and the same troop take it, same troop at tea. That Miguel Lenam, because that Miguel Lenam. Because that Miguel that shoot you in a takan, same to the movie, same to what D and give a lenum, Kula tomato, that give a letter, that you your mother's tomato shabawcha.
And so I was saying here that just in the way that sickness can be so upsetting and disturbing and such torment, really, that we can't do much at all. We can't get involved in much at all. That similarly, when the mind is confused, upset with distraction, and with regard to what it is that should be done, the virtue that we must take up and the negativity that we must lay aside, then any virtue that is entered into will be very ineffectual.
다 니와 셰랍 남다도 미주와 셰랍 남다도 미주와 나 자와레스 다 간자 저 가서도 다 간자 저 이제 다 간자 저 시시메 시시 냠바이나 다 가리용 그랬으나 아니 셰랍 남다도 미주와 나 자와레 시시메베 셈데베 퇴다 섬다 고바 양사 로데 부메 추시도 자발라네 팀메네스.
The next outline was the one where it says that without mindfulness and alertness, that the wisdom that we gain will be very, again, how do you say, of little import. So verse number 25 says, whatever has been learnt, contemplated and meditated upon by those whose minds lack alertness, just like water in a leaking vase, will not be retained in their memory.
로드야 부베추나도 다 본바 이군 자대죠. 이군 요바이나 부베추나도 미네바 자도와 시도 시신냠베 겐지 치점바 치어사 치 점발라 니 데미네 샤바오자 점발라 미네바치. 요거래서 어떻게 소지지 현대바치네 다고 시신기 디가서데 가서도 송바도가 있나? 아니 달로든 부베추네 진짜 부반날 추요바는 부바 되어서는 그 바자도로 와 어째서.
So it's saying here that without alertness, then that all of the learning that we have done, the wisdom arising from learning, the wisdom arising from contemplation, the wisdom arising from meditation, will be as if accumulated in a leaky vase, and so will leak out and be lost. And so similarly, that due to the condition of a degenerated alertness, that such wisdom will not be retained in the memory, that it won't be guarded, protected in the mind. It will be lost.
다 숨바 추제 남다도 비교 안에 자와려 퇴된 대바 젠다는 정말 훈련 도마 양사 시시메베 견차베 동연역다 제발 줬어.
The third of those subheadings was that also due to a lack of mindfulness and alertness, that our ethical conduct will also be very ineffectual. Verse number 26. Even those who have much learning, faith, and willing perseverance will become defiled by a moral fall due to the mistake of lacking alertness.
What is that? Sheshen that Javaina, and it's a Tobaina, Tobayam, Tata Magu John de Euro, what that is the Sheshen the some Majawa Chates, Chakugres, the Yavaina, the Majabaina. 아니 시신 양바이나 다 보다 되게 견디가 좀 벌써 최마도 쳐봐다 대신 그러다 라마 대바 그래서 라마라 대바 젠다 저 안에 담배 최니 주발라 주발 훌레마 되게 망부야 아니 시신 매매 견전다 시신 냠네 시신 가서 동마되면 겐게 안 견잡에 안균 가서 균 동화 녀다 잡아 주에서다 도바 냠자치네 도에게 녀받아 잡아 도에게 견자 중에 용거래서 녀다 잡아 주에서로서.
So it's saying here likewise that again with a lack of alertness, that even though we engage in a great deal of learning. We educate ourselves in the Dharma, or we have a lot of faith in the Guru, or we engage in a lot of willing efforts into putting that Dharma into practice. That without that alertness, that becomes a major fault, and that we have this kind of a mind stream that is prone to downfall, and that our kind of like the whole mind stream will be stained by downfall because of the lack of alertness. So verse number 27 is dealing with a fourth of those 5 points, where it says that without mindfulness and alertness, also previously accumulated virtue will be destroyed. Verse number 27 says, the thieves of unalertness, in following upon the decline of mindfulness, will steal even the merits I have firmly gathered, so that I shall then proceed to the lower realms.
Nyomobeg chomgun, that because of Nyomoba Tizota, Kumata with Tizota, Nyomo Chomgun did Ragi Kawa Chomachiki, Chomgun, Data, and Data. That Yanda Jabanya Chetan is not a delegate Jabanyang, but the water in the Takolia would have seen Chetane, and Sonam Tagi. Yamata so to Sonam Sabata, the Kawa to Tabatega. Casa Tubateda, well, Sonam Dani, Yawa Sajans, and Yama Sonam Sa, the Kawa to Tavayo, that could be not trouble, right? Nor could be said Kumaki, nor talk there, so could be that Kumaki, the Casata, nor the thought the Tones, that nor you more training, and Gawa the trouble, the Skawati, Tonya, and Ubu worship the deck because of the Taka Mizanal Kuchala Yobache, Kuchalati, Okumaja Hakoneti, Yonjanata, not the Trosona, and then Mizan Tobuchagua. What are the rangi Gawa Yobati, and the Jabanyambegi, and then cook up this simne, and rangi Yomobegi, Chomgun Tizuge. Tizuge Yomoba Kuma Tizuge, and Yone rangi Gawa the Trovachiggers. And Gawatonata, so the Gawa. That I am making Ubu Gawa the tenant, that Karchigresna Ubuchana Saji to New Kangito, that Gawa Ubuchana Gawa Meva Sasana, that Nedu Lobudes, Nedu to what you're a show.
So again, outlining the quintessential importance of mindfulness and alertness, because it's saying without that mindfulness and alertness, that the virtue that we have accumulated will be snatched by the bandits of the mental afflictions. They will follow on after the degeneration of our mindfulness, and be able to kind of follow that trail of a lack of mindfulness, and they will snatch all the virtue that we have so assiduously collected, and thereafter we will be bereft of that virtue, and being bereft of that virtue, we will therefore have no means of protecting ourselves from entering into the lower realms. It's kind of like that will be our destination because of that.
What jamba the sheshes tambo sheshen the getchmo chagdwa sheshen mebe sheshen meba yina ani kyon kar chagda sheshen meba yina ta kar chagdosna sheshen meba dilatene ani 제가 자와 간제죠. 투충주의. 다 개와되게 개와 누가 충주주의. 아니 다 셰라남다도 미주의. 로아다 셰라남다도 미주와서도 다 소수 시에바 되게 아니 로드 부배 추는 되어야 셰라남다도 좀 아니 다가는 지금 아니 저 가서 추진대 다 연대 탐색의 시대 차기 요래. 로아 가서는 땡 가서는 그 로아 다 가자 저기 셰랍디 개처부 쉬우시 차기 요. 셰랍 매와이나 산제 고마 톱도 셰랍디 가와다 땡가질 땡겨 땡가디 가서 추종을 땡겨 다 되는자 아니 점바 매와이나 가서 다 점바 매와이나 다 가르쳐 주다 아니 추종 남다도 맞주 맞춰도 그 교체도 와 어떻게 아니 다가내셔 아니 나사셔베 아니 대대 점바 매와는 나사셔베 개와 되게 돼 냠도 와 나사셔게 개와 되게 냠바이나 다 가르쳐 그랬으나 아니 냐소는 깨도 와 다들 방법을 와 오다 제도 와 다들은 나바들 가려서 나바 나를 맞제베 아니 개와 tum이도 딱 나를 마사베 개와지 개와사도 되대 아니 두베 아니 객지기라스 객자만이
So this is really very clearly outlining all different faults associated with a lack of mindfulness and a lack of alertness from the beginning of really making our virtue very, very ineffectual as well, bringing no kind of punch or concentration and focus to our virtue. So it becomes so insignificant because of that. And then secondly, how it compromises wisdom, that again, all the effort we put into generating wisdom will become nothing or very little because we haven't combined with mindfulness and alertness. And in the context of the higher trainings, we know how my wisdom itself is based on meditative concentration in order to have that penetrating power to see through the nature of reality. But meditative concentration in turn is built on ethical conduct. And we can see in this list as well how a lack of mindfulness and alertness can really destroy our ethical conduct. It really waters down our ethical commitments. So we are tainted, as it says, we are stained by fault and downfall, even though we are making every effort otherwise. So you can see how insidious the lack of mindfulness and alertness is. It's kind of like absolutely key component to our spiritual practice. And so, and it's just as we have just heard, it is that kind of steals our previously accumulated virtue. Again, it's kind of like allowing the thieves or bandits of mental affliction to get in the door and to steal our wealth of previously accumulated merit and virtue, and therefore leaving us completely bereft of virtue. And it's not a good position to be in. Being bereft of virtue, the only destination for us is the lower realms. And now we come to the fifth of those points, saying that not only previously accumulated virtue is gone, but also it becomes an obstacle. The lack of mindfulness and alertness itself becomes an obstacle to our future accumulation of virtue. So verse 28 says, "This host of thieves, who are my own disturbing conceptions, will search for a good opportunity. Having found it, they will steal my virtue and destroy the attainment of life in a happy realm."
라니네 아니 개와 총과 제제 개와 총진 dendro tori tabe soja ane jomba chikres ta gewa to na ane tori goma duwe da taba gyal ti gewa dige gewa du ma do ne gewa to na ane tori ge da ngondu goma da daga ne shinge ko ane tabe taba daga ne tamje kema dige ge ane soja ane jomba chikres jomba chelas ane sheshenda ma jawa jawa ta de yima yinsa 아니 지금 세신스인데 맞아와 제디 개침버리면도 세신다 제와이나 아니 다 겨우 좀토야 거라요 말았어 아니 겨우 고급 거라 책이 말와 얘가 고급 맞아 봤잖아 아니 다 가르치 그랬으나 아니 겨우다 미투바 리미투베 아니 다 가서데 디베 자와라 동도로 아니 디제도 다 간자 저기 개바 상부에 평가말에 점을 용도라 산재를 최다 되는 소설 가야 평가말에 소설 가야 평가말로 다 소설을 다 민백개와 차되기로 와 소설 민백개와 차되기로 다 소설이 저기 대박의 송 세신의 자라체 되게 제토바이나 안 저기 점을 용도라 최 시작에 다 매바 있네 소설데 아니 가서 다 같이 개바 상부에서 차되기로 와 다 개바 상다 상 마상데 치怎么了？这样了，给我上马上这么多，让了给我上的马上给这么多，让了给我上的马上这个，让了给我上不明的，去给我上过的平个马吧，到，但这里不到，这把的手给这么多，我这这，给外出来这么慢点把这个的事，把这个这个的事。
And so here is saying too that without being protected by mindfulness and alertness, that we are open to our virtue being stolen by this gang of bandits or gang of thieves, which are our mental afflictions, that they are simply seeking for an opportunity. And because that opportunity is offered by a lack of mindfulness and alertness, they will rob our virtue, and because of this, then we can't have any the kind of opportunity, the hope of gaining a future rebirth, a positive, fortunate human rebirth as a celestial being or a human being, or the attainment of liberation. Those hopes are destroyed, and they are completely dashed, and so. That means we must never be separated from that mind of mindfulness and alertness. That we can see that when we also lack mindfulness and alertness, it not only gives the opportunity to mental affliction like a gang of thieves, but also we don't get the opportunity for virtue. So it's kind of double negative there. And that if there's kind of like we have all of the conducive conditions for Dharma in the world, we have access to pure teachers and all that, but we lack mindfulness and alertness, it's really almost completely irrelevant to us. It's pointless. On the other hand, if there's no Dharma left in the world, no pure teachers left in the world, but we have a pure mindfulness and alertness, and then our virtue will be pure as well. And if this will be all that we need, and that so that's kind of really the key question, that when we are engaging in virtue, is it pure virtue or not, or how pure that virtue is or not.
아니 지금 알아도 다 가져 지금 돈하체는 근데 수고 위험이 돈하체는 개침으로도 대세기 맞아가 있나 저마다 시신가 맞아 아니 셔마 검 셔마게 맞죠네 대세기 장단되게 대세기 장단데 딱딱 하고 받잖네 아니 지금 가서도 제발 그래서 정국도 시신의 자라 그래서 제국도 이게 내가 개치슈치래도 이거 낙사절래도 디 마조는 먼저 지금 가서도 지금 칸디 계조다 냠네 근데 제가 있네. 아니 디 작다 제투서 말와. 다디도 거 지금 딱딱 비다고 용하다 어다 계획 미관을 전부 근데 송고도. 다디 거 전부 송다데 그 지금 랑 그거다 냠뇽라 파자니. 아니 시신게 잘하데 전배 마냥바 디 땅갈 엔 디갈 딱딱 대투데 시신게 냠 마냥 따에 잘하데 그래서 제고도. 디게디 제네 아니 거 대시게 따다 냐투근지 중화 임바이나 아니 강투도게 아니 계획처럼 내라 땡땡 편도 용설와
So yes, that we take it for granted that we are in some way committed to the engaging in virtue, trying to be of benefit. But sometimes I think it's worthwhile to pull back and to simply focus on mindfulness and alertness itself, to kind of really ask the question of how well I am capable of sustaining my mindfulness and alertness, and that the mindfulness to focus on that subject or that object of virtue, the alertness to engage in the checking process, to keep asking the question of how well I am maintaining that focus, and to work on that itself. I think it's a very, very important point. It's like to really recognize mindfulness and alertness as the key tools that you must keep sharpened in relation to any virtue that you engage in. And so in our practice that we do on a daily basis, that a focus on virtue, we can tell by our own experience, where we can ask that question, whether or not, one, we are focused at all, and two, to what degree are we sustaining mindfulness and alertness on the object of virtue, and to what extent can we stay on that object of virtue. So we kind of like really engaging in a kind of an assessment of your own practice of mindfulness and alertness.
다가니 지금 검자기 인바이네레 다가니 지금 가서도 추글 롭존 지게 있는 다 룽아 자와 거리 지게 계획 자와 근데 지게 인바이네 아니 지다 다 굴론도 섬제 탐제도 산제 고마 토바 지게 있어야 돼다 같이 녀바도 고고요래 아니 대가들 녀바도 다 젬베 송 시신게 아니 자라 지게 야선데 되게 그 편바지 숙성보신 게 땅에 계시 뭐 있어야 다 젬베 송고 그러다 마소나 젬발이 냠네 예 개와 두고 있어도 개와 많이 맞춰 내가 요래서 뒤 못쳐가지 다가 이제 개와데 딱 젬바 따다 내야라 아니 시신게 아니 자라 제투가 지게 삼사체 생 편바 땅 와이나 아니 제시가 로 묘부제가 레투예지 저 남매 소리 전에
So that's to avoid also sort of like a lack of any sort of attention being paid to the mental factors of mindfulness and alertness. I think we ought to emphasize it as well, to kind of like understand that in meditation or in our studies or in any way, in any kind of virtue that we are engaging in, on the side of virtue, to whatever we are doing, that we, of course, start with our motivation. We are doing what we're doing in order to attain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. This is, of course, absolutely necessary. But thereafter, it's no harm to just check in on our commitment to mindfulness and alertness. Understand, like, that mindfulness is that which is sets our focus on the virtue that we are going to engage in, and that is so important. And to kind of recognize the dangers of not having that mindfulness, as outlined already, and as very clear to us that that virtue, if we engage in that virtue, then it will have very little kind of effect, it would be very ineffectual, I should say. And then to sustain alertness as well, as that the kind of a checking process, the checking of mindfulness, the checking the degree to which we are focused on the virtue that we have or motivated for. So you kind of like really overemphasizing these two qualities to make sure that the virtue that we are going to commit to is a proper, fully powered virtue. And so it's kind of really placing more importance on establishing mindfulness and alertness at the outset of any virtuous action.
And then take your migwati, Kalashani, Gawa migwati, Tembati, and Kasoda Taba, Kasoda Natench. You got the Tembachi. And it did Jabati, and it took that Kasoda Tata Dea, Matenga, Kato Katola, Chatuingi, and it shit the Shishins, Jarachikin, Chik, Kato, and it Jaman Yamego Gotsu on Duna, and it don't water to each. And the Mato and a beautiful Masoa. Japan Yaba in a beautiful Masoa, and she said the water to each. What did it?
So they work in kind of tandem in terms of maintaining a focus on the object of virtue, with mindfulness opening up the process of focusing on a particular object of virtue, settling one's attention on that object, and then the alertness aspect of really like a spy, just checking on the degree to which we are actually focused on the object of virtue, checking the quality of that attention and making adjustments as necessary. So it's kind of like this, and also like really, maintaining this sort of tandem approach to sustain for a longer period of time our ability to focus on the object of virtue.
So, Jabal Yamba the Lamja, Shishingi, Jabal Yamba the Lamja, Chartumich. Jabal near to each and Jabal Yamba Lamja Chartumich. What I judge Jabba the Shishin Yidi and the Bench Castle, Kumbuja net to each. Got you in a Kuni that Kumbuja net to each.
So these two should be at all times like at full capacity for us, and that the alertness is checking for any deterioration in the mindfulness, and thereafter making any necessary adjustments to bring it back up to speed, as it were, to focus fully at its full capacity. And so this is something that we should be conscientious about.
And the General 9 which border security in the chicken with what concentration to go Australia Jalagari with the Tagish. What did I compare to Budwa? Meet on the Tagish and any Jalakari Kalakata Habudwa. Chitua, what are Chicasore? Chicasore, Chinomo Chola Montoya, gave me but a day to each. Chiorvata, what the legend Kaja Chicasore Kenjakari Yemi Hako and Castle that Tata Chicaso Jambala interest near to a check. Give actually interest near to a check and near to that young give actually a year to go to year to go to year what Jembe Tata because she a Tata Jarache to a year to go to Lamja sent to a church. You what is sent to a church, sent to a church.
We're going to say maybe to put in mind the border security situation in Australia, where the border security agents are so how do you say, conscientious about spotting any contraband coming into the country, and we can, use our mindfulness and alertness to kind of like check for any contraband coming into the mind and our focus and so on. And the mindfulness that places the attention on the object of virtue at the outset, and then the alertness that it checks for any deterioration in that mindfulness, any fading in that mindfulness, and then immediately makes the necessary adjustments to bring it up to speed again.
Oh yeah, and
so we leave it there for today.
Yeah. 다 되는데 가서 라마 투명 공부 좀 봐. 라마 투명 공부 좀 돼도 아니 랑게 지 것들에 다 지금 토스제네 원남에 그 바게다 지금 저 코에 내다 가봤대 봐 이네 다 같이 지금 동해그랑 실내 미대 봐 인베인도 아니 코알링 예바 좀 연중 지요 공 안되는 연중 걸로 다가라 랑게 지볼라 아니 가서다 다 그죠 뼈마 담아게 봐 지도 소선도 공부시.
So then we begin the dissolution process. Here again, focusing on the central figure and the space in front, and Guru Munindra, Shakti Buddha. And we are contemplating on renunciation, how, it's so clear that from the peak of cyclic existence down to the hell without respite, that this whole reality is in the nature of suffering. And we really have, strong determination to gain definite emergence from this state, and this brings forth the lotus mandala seed that we place now on our crown.
What is it? And then, Chinanga Chok and this is and you didn't do us. These are your marriage. Quite a choice, some of that. Because you didn't never come to the cars of what dinner to what it was. Dinner to write you didn't do the Kuka your mothers. That you didn't matter what the Kaja customs to the commission.
And so then we consider all external and internal phenomena as lacking any objective existence, that they are completely devoid of any existence, and that they must arise in dependence. And that very fact discounts the possibility that they could have any independent or objective or independent existence. So we bring that contemplation to the point where we are merely refuting the object of refutation. From that arises the sun disk mandala seat on our crown. And because reality is like that, because there is absolutely no inherent or objective existence, because phenomena arise dependently, that allows for the whole system of cause and effect, that a suitable cause will bring about its corresponding effect. This is all made possible. Therefore, I can accumulate the necessary causes to attain the effect of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And this motivation, the mind of enlightenment, leads to the creation of the moon disk mandala seat on our crown.
아니 돈발라 라마 샤제스가 미나 반제자에 라마를 뭐지 다기 지워 빼면되죠. 그리고 고수도 좀 모두 선도 제발한테는 아니 라마 도비아 공부 아니 가서 랑이 지워라 봐. 저소 삼사천 다 가자 답이 가서 니베 가서 수배가 때문에 산제 공부 마토 보다 제소소 서서 공부하시.
Then we recite the invocation verse glorious and precious root Guru, come take your lotus and moon seat placed here on my crown. Keep me safe in your kindness. Bestow on me the attainments of body, speech, and mind. At the end of the first recitation, the figure moves from the space in front. At the end of the second, the Buddha has arrived at our pre-prepared seat on the crown. At the end of the third recitation, we have the certainty that the Buddha will remain there until we attain the state of enlightenment, and we rejoice in this.
Then that rangi ningde or takaja what that again is chen takaja nyanjuga samlojata semjike or nyanjuga samlojata and the degulote rangi the pemata joso samsacha or the patauta yata yala to mende the char konda on the chazawa the tree show jesu tamjan gyawa tamjata tamji or the chazawa the tree show jesu and gyawa 자자와의 주의 샤바의 제수이라는 경우죠. 탐자다가 전주 자자와의 주의 샤바의 제수이라는 경우죠. 경우죠. 저 탐자다를 자주 증오고 40배지 중심에 수야를 지니데 뭐 상계점 저거 남다셔라 저 이당고를 하면 달라가 니야 타야 미스터 간자 야라도만 맨데다 저 조사 직접 와다들지 아니 되네다 연중의 셈지 삼로단에 랑이 닝데 뼈마다 되지를 주소 삼사차 되네 되게 내시잖아 셈제 탐제게도 산제 고마 두긴 있어 그 두긴 나한테 가봐도 째죠 많이 받다가라 가서 셈샤 아니 되네 셈샤데 what 되게 가서 가자 가삼 되게 예를 놓다가라 아니 님의 좀 약하고 주소서 다 셈제 탐제도 산제 고마 받다가 타면도 요한이도 타바지 있어 엔저 로식게 안 되게 로데 dum바티 아니 다리 좀 약하고 주소 삼사차
And from this rejoicing, we offer the 7 limbed practice and the mandala, including the offering of prostration, of making offerings of purifying negativities, of requesting the Buddha not to enter Parinirvana, but to stay and teach, and the dedication and so on. Then at the heart center, we start the establishment of a similar seating arrangement, a prospect of inviting the Buddha down to our heart center, again going through our brief contemplation on renunciation, seeing cyclic existences in the nature of suffering, wanting that definite emergence. From that thinking arises the lotus mandala seat. The I, who is thinking like this, we search for that sense of self, not finding it, and stopping at the mere negation of the object of negation, producing the sun disk mandala seat. And that this understanding of the lack of inherent existence, proving the fact that phenomena arise independent, therefore I can attain the state of enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And may I quickly attain that state of enlightenment, being synonymous with the bodhicitta motivation, and that's symbolized by the moon disk mandala seat.
Then that part is a Lama was telling Ninga Permit, Kuzu to the Motosato, to the Sunday Chavaltana, and Chibone, Marchon, Lama Shajas and Chibone, Marchon, and hanging Ninga Permata. They got a show so supertension, Sanjay Komato, but the Jesus so the Renin Permata come out to be snatched. They got to check over Sang of a Chakaja Kaja. He Sanga title monument, title monument mamas. So then because of the Chabe was Marapas and Lati. Then go yet on my head on my shaman. I saw what did you get a quarter of commission.
And then we make the invocation verse again, inviting the Buddha down, reciting this thrice. The first begins the journey from the crown down through the central channel. At the end of the second recitation, the Buddha has arrived at our pre-prepared seat at the heart. And at the end of the third, the Buddha will remain. We have that certainty that they will remain until we attain the state of enlightenment. This brings forth a sense of real joy and rejoicing on our part. The petals of the lotus then fold over the central figure and are sealed at the tips by a white five-pronged Sevivajra. The package is surrounded by 3 mantras. The name mantra of Shakyamuni Buddha in a clockwise direction, the mantra of Manjushri in an anti-clockwise direction, and the mantra of dependent origination in a clockwise direction.
What are the ranking use of Lama Shajas show the Kusun to le, we said part of member to Rang Chibon, Kanti Palo, we said to Valatena, Toma member devoted to Kavatuya and Chika Kasura Takajaja. Because of the search of Major Misans or Juntamas, nothing is a lot of so that can be get to that given. Takaji, Chevakanamata, Ranshan Kadava, never got a son at Chetan, Sengama Tinga, Toma members devoted to us. Tarnishing the soda, Tomataka, Chajus of Lavata, Sanga, Tazita, Pada Malamagu, Temple the Lovela Magu, the Trossamo. Kujo to the negative legible, Simja the new legible, do not told it the topic gets with your court and you do so. Chichimata, but charge it that what Johnson, so the water commission.
And so then from the body, speech, and mind, the Buddha within light rays begin to emanate through the lotus petals, through our entire body, from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, completely purifying, filling our body with pure light, purifying all negativities and obscurations that we have accumulated in general since beginning this time, dealing with the negativities of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, of lying and harsh speech, divisive speech, and idle gossip, of malicious intent, of covetousness, of wrong view, all of the particular negativities associated with the naturally occurring negativities of all those that have been prescribed by the Buddha, the downfalls and infractions of any prati-moksha, bodhisattva, or tantric vows, the negativities that have been accumulated in this life, in previous lives, that are going back to beginningless time, any disrespect to our father, our mother, or any all the way up to disrespect for our spiritual teachers, any karmas that have leading to any physical illness or mental illness, that they are all completely and utterly purified. And that all yes, the negativities leading to any kind of sickness or illness or disease, and also a mental illness, that all these are completely and utterly purified. All the negativities associated with an imbalance to our channels, winds and drops and the elements, they are gone, and these are balanced again. And that particularly that which is the major obstacle to our quickly being able to attain enlightenment, being ordinary appearance, that this is transformed into our being able to view with pure appearance. And then through the combination of my own most subtle wind acting as the substantial cause, with the wind of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own body is transformed into the enlightened body of the Buddha. Through the combination of my own most subtle mind acting as the substantial cause, together with the mind of the Buddha acting as the cooperative conditions, my own mind is transformed into the enlightened mind of Buddha. Now, my body, speech, and mind are inseparable from the body, speech, and mind of an enlightened being. This brings forth a sense of bliss. This combines with voidness, and I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. The place I am in is also transformed of all fault and into the celestial abode of an enlightened being. Then, seeing myself as a fully enlightened Buddha, lacking any inherent existence, I send forth rays of light from my own heart center, equal in number to all of the beings in the 6 realms of existence. Upon touching all these beings, they are completely transformed into enlightened Buddhas, and that the place that they are in is transformed of all fault and becomes the celestial abode of an enlightened being. And this bringing all of the denizens of these 3 realms of existence to the state of enlightenment, today that has been accomplished, I rejoice. And this process of leading all sentient beings to the state of enlightenment, the virtue that has underwritten this process, myself as the agent of that virtue, all are lacking any of the objective existence and are merely imputed by thought. From this arises a state of bliss which combines with voidness, and again I abide in the wisdom of non-dual bliss and voidness. And I know that this isn't only operating at the level of imagination. How can it be so easy? It's not, but I make it sincere dedication that this can quickly come from the state of imagination to making it a reality as quickly as possible, and that all of the conducive conditions for making it so may come together, and all of the inconducive conditions may be avoided. So make this the dedication to use everything, every situation to enhance the mind of enlightenment, the theory of emptiness, that whatever situation I'm in, whether I'm sick, whether I'm on the verge of death, it makes no difference. I make a prayer so that I can use any situation quickly to allow for that understanding of emptiness and the understanding of the mind of enlightenment to increase more and more.
What is it?
Nyan Yup Sen Cho Bo Ma Kim Pa Ke Pa Nyam Go Ni Hao Ma Kim Pa Ke Pa Nyam Go Wei Shin Kam Pen Dan You are Avalokiteshvara, great treasure of compassion, not aimed at true existence, and Manjushri, master of flawless wisdom, as well as Vajrapani, destroyer of hordes of demons without exception. Tsongkhapa, crown jewel of the stages of the land of snow, Losang Drakpa at your feet, and make requests.